And our Bible reading from this week is going to come from Titus chapter 1. It's 2022, and we're beginning our new Bible reading and starting in the book of Titus, mainly because our theme for 2022 is coming from the book of Titus. So let's remind you about that. In Titus chapter 2 and verse 14, our focus is on that phrase right at the end of the verse where we're urged to be zealous for good deeds. That will be our reading, and throughout the year, our readings, or that will be our theme, I should have said. Our readings are going to try to complement that theme, except for these first three.
Right, and there we just want to read through the book in which the theme is found. Folks might go back and listen to your sermon this morning if they weren't able to catch that, where you kind of did a nice job of kind of setting up how that theme walks through the book.
And that's really important to us. We don't want to just grab biblical language because it works for where we want to use it, but we want to use it in its proper context. So we wanted to start the year by reading through Titus so that we would have a sense of the letter as a whole, and we could see how the theme fits into the broader context of the book, or that statement does. Now, in keeping with that, it seems to me that one of the things that Paul is working all the way through the book is this idea of lining up belief and behavior. Because of who you are, what God has made us. Verse 14 of chapter 2 refers to us as, his own people. There's a certain kind of lifestyle that goes with it. And interesting, since we're reading chapter 2 this week, watch for that. Even in verse number 1, he kind of hints at it there, doesn't he, a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think part of the thing that we want folks to remember there too, Dave, along your lines of belief and the works is, in the religious world, if we have one or the other, we think we're okay. People who have right beliefs, but maybe don't practice them, think that God's okay with that. And by the same token, people think if I do good deeds from good intentions, the beliefs and that side of my faith doesn't matter. And what Titus is reminding us is we need both. We need both. And then, to your point, at the beginning, at the beginning of verse 1 there, knowledge of the truth which accords with godliness, a right orientation towards God and the way to live before Him in the world.
So let's talk a little about chapter 1, because that's the piece that we're going to be working this week. And after that sort of introductory salutation, and he identifies himself and Titus as the recipient, we get off into verse 5. Verse 5 seems to be a restatement of why he left him there, and also the admonition for what he wants him to do going forward, and that is to set in order what remains. When I talked about that in the lesson this morning, I said there's actually some mystery around that, because setting in order what remains could look a couple of different directions, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But ultimately, I think regardless of how we, kind of try to solve that idea, the fact of the matter is that these elders he once appointed in every town are the means by which that order is going to be maintained. And again, these are going to have to be men who both believe the right things and therefore do the right things, are full of good works. And we begin to see these works defined in the type of men that these elders are supposed to be.
So that's interesting, because we usually think of Titus 1, and that's the first thing that comes to our mind. Elders, because that's part of setting in order what remains, getting elders appointed in every city. And then I think typically our attention is drawn to the list of qualifications there, and certainly we're told what kind of character and ability an elder needs to have. But we're also sort of Paul explains rather why that's so important, because picking up at verse 10, he talks about the problem that makes the need for elders so great.
That's right. These men that are described in verses 10 through 16 are the antithesis to elders. They're the opposite of elders. And so if you have elders, in these description in verses 5 through 9, as men who do good deeds, and who ultimately in verse 9 can be summarized then as holding firm to the trustworthy word as taught, then you have the opposite here. These are men who are empty talkers, deceivers, who engage in lying and other types of activity, and who must be therefore silenced. And must elsewhere, then a couple verses down, verse 14, rebuked sharply, verse 13, rebuked sharply. And so these men need to be part of what needs to be put in order is to deal with these type of men who are not just not qualified to be elders, but almost the opposite, have the opposite effect that elders have.
In fact, interestingly, and I think this is almost sometimes for us almost counterintuitive. When we think about good works, we think about taking the casserole to the neighbor
That's right.
who lost his mom, right?
That's right. Which is a fine thing to do.
Well, it certainly is a good work.
But
it's too narrow a view.
that's right.
Because what's being described here, these elders standing up to the false teacher who's disturbing whole families,
Right.
calling him out and answering him and silencing him, is a good work.
Absolutely.
And what Paul has in mind as he writes here to
Right.
Titus, the kind of thing. Well, of course, in the book, several groups are identified for special works that they're
Right.
supposed to do. And this is what an elder is supposed to do.
That's
At least
right.
part of it
That's right.
is to protect the church from this error.
That's right. And so maybe as we go through this theme this year and all the passages that we're going to be reading, one of the things we want to remember is that good deeds are often spiritual in nature as much as they are physical in nature. And a lot of what determines a good deed for you is what role you have in life, like you've talked about. We'll talk about it coming forward. But you talked about this morning, older women, younger women. Here it's elders, what have you. But there are specific good deeds to different roles that we may have in life, and they're often spiritual in nature. And so while we do want to do kind deeds of generosity and caring, we need to also think more broadly, to your point, I think the way you put it, that's too narrow a focus. We do need to be broad in understanding there's a lot of spiritual good deeds the Bible has in mind that we need to be engaged in as well, starting here with elders in chapter 1.
Yeah, I wonder if by the end of the year, one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to have a much more robust.
Randy's word.
I thought, man, here's a place to use it. A much more robust understanding of what good works
Yeah.
are. And really, they constitute this lived out relationship between us and Jesus as we embrace our faith and let it work its way out into our life. In fact, verse 16 serves as a great foil. It's the other side.
Right.
Because talking about these false teachers, Paul says that they profess to know God,
Right.
but by their deeds they deny him. And so there is that, going back to where we started, that lining up
Right.
of what you believe with how you behave. There's a certain life that ought to go with believing in Jesus. And in this case, hey, they may have said there with Jesus,
Right.
but you looked at the life, wasn't there, it didn't line up.
And so they are unfit for any good work, as he closes that verse.
Yep. Yeah. Well, listen, we hope you'll spend some time this week reading in Titus 1. But let me make this suggestion as well. Read through the whole letter.
Yeah.
I found it really useful. It's not that long
No.
to just go through the whole thing and to read it as though you're Titus, sort of opening the envelope and reading it for the first time.
Right.
From beginning to end. It really gives you a different sense, I think, of, and helps you see it as a whole unit. So that will begin our work first in Titus, and then reading through the scripture, looking for good works.